Ryan Rashog alongside Craig Button and Frank Seravalli here in Vancouver, where after a fairly quiet day one, day two started with a bang. Gentlemen, Frank, you alluded to the fact last night that Ray Shero wanted to leave Vancouver with more than just Jack Hughes. Well, he's leaving Vancouver with PK Subban as well. Take us through the trade and the logic behind it.
That's right. He had me salivating a little bit when he said expect the unexpected. Well, this is unexpected in the way that the Nashville Predators were able to unload $9 million off of their salary cap without retaining any of it. They had told teams in the last week or so that they were willing to eat up to 30% of PK Subban's contract, bringing it down to a much more palatable $6 million. But the fact that they were able to get the entire thing off their cap, it made the return a little bit lessened for them. You know, all of a sudden the 2 second-round picks, you figure maybe one of them is a first-round pick, but the New Jersey Devils had oodles of cap space. Now they get a right-shot defenseman that they can plug into their lineup and make a big step forward. But for this team, Ray Shero talked about making a splash. He didn't want to just leave here with just adding Jack Hughes to his roster, even though that's a significant addition. He wanted to go in here and improve this team's chances of getting back to the Stanley Cup playoffs.
And just rounding out the trade, Steve Santini, Jeremy Davies, and a couple of second-round picks. Jacob Trouba was a big trade. Went to the New York Rangers a short time ago. Ray Shero answering serve here. How do you compare this trade to the other one?
It's fascinating. Is the Hudson River rivalry back on here? You know, Jack Hughes versus Capo Caco on Friday night with the first-round picks, 1 and 2. Trouba, and you got now Subban going to the Devils. Listen, right now, Trouba's a better player than PK Subban. PK Subban is going to get his game up to the level that he's been showing in the past. Last year was not a good year for PK Subban. So for the New Jersey Devils to really take advantage of PK Subban's got to take advantage of his abilities and his skills and get his game up to the level that he can, because last year was an off year for PK Subban.
3 years left at $9 million for PK Subban. Let's transition to Kyle Dubas and the Toronto Maple Leafs. They have lots of important players to try and get signed. There's talk of potentially moving players out. And Patrick Marleau, a player that had to waive his no trade, was dealt today. Frank, going to the Carolina Hurricanes, take us through the way this deal will work and why it made sense for the Leafs.
Well, it's very similar in the sense of the Nashville Predators trying to unload PK Subban's contract. The key here for the Toronto Maple Leafs was that they were able to deal with the Carolina Hurricanes and not retain any salary. So $6.25 million comes off the Toronto Maple Leafs salary cap, goes to Carolina. Patrick Marleau was over 35 when he signed his contract with the Leafs. So all of that cap hit will remain with the Carolina Hurricanes when we expect them to buy out his contract. So it'll stay on their books. They'll pay the salary, including the signing bonuses that were due to him both in the summer and the winter. And in exchange, the Maple Leafs get that freedom. They gave up a conditional first-round pick in addition to a couple other picks. And the reason for that is, you know, to get rid of that salary. So that creates the space that they potentially need to re-sign Mitch Marner. What do they do with their defense? Is there any chance that they could potentially explore keeping a guy like Jake Gardiner? They have lots of decisions on their hands, but this was the first step forward, which is why Kyle Dubas put the heat on Patrick Marleau's camp. And now in exchange for Patrick Marleau, this is kind of a sweet deal, because now you become an unrestricted free agent when this buyout is executed. You could re-sign a small deal with the San Jose Sharks. And so there were a number of teams that were interested in taking on that hit, but the Carolina Hurricanes were the one team that were willing to take on all of it.
So you have to give up a first-round pick to get rid of a player that only has 1 year left on his deal. Over $6 million, so the cap space is important, Craig, but it seems to me it was pretty expensive. Maybe an indication of the pressure that Dubas is under with some big, important players needing money.
Price of business. And the price of business when you're right up against the salary cap and you have young players that are in need of some hefty pay increases, Mitch Marner at the top of that list, and then you go to Kapanen, you go to Andreas Johnsson, trying to help your blue line. This is the price of business. And when you're a contender, I mean, you're going to have to consider and swallow hard on that first-round draft pick, but that first-round draft pick is going next year or the year after. It's only conditional based on if it's a top 10. But for the Toronto Maple Leafs, this was a necessary piece of business for them going forward. And for them to be a contender and try to move their team forward, it had to happen. But it is a price to pay for being up against the salary cap and having a player that can't perform at the level of that number.
And I think the thing that we come back to is the third year on that deal ended up being the killer. You know, go back to when Patrick Marleau signed with the Leafs, making the decision to leave the San Jose Sharks. They weren't willing to go beyond 2 years, and now you see why it made sense for them. And kind of we were saying at the beginning, it boxed initially that team from probably precluding them from re-signing a guy like James Van Riemsdyk. like. Now it was getting in the way of some other things, and so he did some nice things for that team, certainly helped that leadership core and the young guys. You saw his message that he tweeted out to Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner about how much he enjoyed his time in Toronto. That's now come to an end.
27 goals his first year was a solid opening year for Patrick Marleau. I'm kind of excited, guys. I mean, not a single trade really of note on day one of the draft. And before the first name is called on day two, we have two big ones. We'll see what remains here in Vancouver on Saturday.